So this is the workshop called Ansible Automation, and it's really specific to the Windows environment. So often when people think Red Hat, they're thinking Linux, but this is specific to Windows, and it's been a big uptake and very much leverage for people with the Windows environment. So we're lucky to have Chris, who is the expert and has done a lot of these workshops to talk about the Ansible automation in the Windows environment today. So we'll start with a quick introduction on who R2I is. And then Chris will be talking about the Red Hat Ansible automation, probably about 45 minutes. Then we'll do the Q&A. If there's any questions during, just raise your hand as well, so you can ask questions during the session if you want. And then there'll be a hands-on exercise. So we've scheduled this from 11 to 12, but from 12 to 3 p.m., Chris will continue with the workshop. You'll have received a way to log in, and you can do hands-on exercises specifically to the Windows and Ansible environment. So myself, my name is Tamara Vandersoos. I work at R2I. My title is VP of Innovation. I call it, I get to chase the shiny things. So I work in areas of AI and working a lot more recently in Kubernetes, talking to customers about their strategy in this area, and with automation, of course. Christopher Reed here is the design sales engineer at Red Hat. He's working for TD SYNNEX, which is a distributor, the largest global distributor for all the products Red Hat. So he does a lot of these kind of demonstrations and a great technical resource for us at R2I. A bit of a background: Chris is located in Columbia, South Carolina, known for famously hot town, meaning it's extremely hot temperature-wise, but I suspect it's famously hot as well, right, Chris? So he's in industry. He's been a Linux admin. He comes up and he's been working for TD SYNNEX, as I mentioned, and he does all of these kind of hands-on. So he's very technical. So go ahead and ask the hard questions. He'll be doing the technical portion of the presentation. So a quickly introduction of who R2I is for those that don't know. The R in our first name stands for resources. We're proud to be technical resources first. And the 2 I's is for infrastructure. We are infrastructure sellers, and integration standing for our cloud offering as well. So we are infrastructure specialists, but we also sell a lot of supporting products around that, such as the whole Red Hat suite. So we're all about our vision is simplifying information technology as it gets more and more complex, is to help you through that journey. And we have a very deep technical team to assist with that. And our mission is really about respecting the past, meaning respecting your legacy applications and moving you forward into the future to be able to leverage the new technologies. Very quickly, sort of where we work. I mentioned the IT for the I for infrastructure, and the cloud computing as which I refer to as the integration, the other I that's in our name. So it's really infrastructure. We have a large cloud offering. We also offer managed services around that, whether it's on-prem, whether you buy on-prem infrastructure or you're in the cloud. We also, newly this year, we have what we call an IBM I development services, where we help maintain some of that legacy code clients might have. And then we do digital transformation, doing things like roadmaps to AI or strategies or, containerization. We'll have those discussions and access to the experts for that. So, of course, in the middle is our consulting, which is the R for R2I, where we do a lot of technical services as well. So we've our cloud is referred to as Edwin. So Edwin is R2I's cloud. We have a total of 5 data centers. We are the largest, I would say, in Canada that has both IBM Power and x86. We're 100% Canadian. in terms of the people that access the equipment, as well as where the data will reside, including all the backups. We're highly certified in terms of our ISO certifications, and we continue to add certifications every year, building on the ones that we already have. We offer a 24/7 bilingual service, so we have a NOC where we'll be doing the surveillance of either the customer's on-prem servers or our own cloud environment. Our availability has been outstanding. There's no technology lock-in. It's Canadian dollars, so your invoice is going to stay consistent. It's not going to vary with the exchange rate. We have no egress costs. There's a person that you can call, and we really customize our cloud offering to your needs. So a little bit, the numbers about Edwin, our cloud, is that we're servicing over 150,000 users on our platform, servicing companies worth $60 billion. And our uptime we're really proud of is being 99.99%. We've been up and running on our cloud. The R2I has been around now for almost 10 years, and our cloud's been probably up for about 7 years. So we're quite where we were ahead of IBM in putting the IBM Power Systems in the cloud here in Canada. In terms of our partners or who our partners with, we deal with quite a bit. So Red Hat, obviously, which is why we're here today. IBM is a big partner, Lenovo, Dell, and you can read this list here. You can have access to the presentation. And I'll pass it over to Chris to start the session on the Ansible automation.
Perfect. Thank you. Give me a second to get my screen situated. Oh, I'm gonna have to ask you to stop sharing real quick so I can share my screen.
Chat QA, new share, oh, stop sharing right there.
And I'll need a little help on feedback here because my screen, I'm not gonna lie, is ginormous. So everybody see that okay? Does that look okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to do a quick 1-2 on what kind of my timing and breakaway is, kind of how I approach this. So today we're going to go through an Ansible hands-on workshop. We have roughly about an hour to go through this. If any of you are planning to stay later, awesome. I know some of you initially committed for an hour, so let's talk about that. If we're going through an hour, we want to go through what we call the introductory slide portion. Then I'm going to give you access to the workshops. If you have already looked at the chat, you will see the link to go ahead and get access. Feel free to click that and go ahead and get jump started, whatever you'd prefer. Roughly after we get through this first section, I'll tell you, I'll be like, hey, it's time either for you to drop off, or if you want to stay, you can stay. My approach is always hands-on. It is always warm. And in saying that, if you have questions, if you have concerns, if you don't quite understand what I'm trying to target, or I have lost what I was trying to target, feel free to interrupt, to interact, to interject, right? Ask questions. If it's just me talking, I guarantee you I can get you to sleep in an hour. So if you're missing any sleep, now would be the time, right? And without that, does anybody have any questions before I get moving forward? The format, the questions, where we're getting to, where the hop-off points are, any of that? I'm going to pause here for a second just in case somebody did. All right, someone's asking for recording. Perfect. All right. Any questions before we get moving forward? This is where I pause. Because I can get moving. And I will say my pace tends to be rapid, but we don't want to go super fast if we're missing the key objectives. Also cut off my video here because I talk with my hands and I'm not very good at magic, so you don't want to see any of that. Perfect. All right, so I guess without further ado, let's get rolling. So today we're going to talk about Ansible Windows automation, right? How we connect, how we work, what's the benefit to automation, where do we get started? All of those are important questions, and we're going to tackle them together. So real quick, just from a high-level overview, what we're going to run through is the introduction to Ansible automation, how Ansible works with Windows, understanding Ansible, the modules and the playbooks, the Ansible controller and how to scale, how to utilize, what is RBAC, right? What is this RESTful API? Why do I need it? What's the benefit? And then reusing automation, not just with Ansible roles, but also with Ansible collections. As well, if nobody can see this, or if you're having issues seeing what's being presented here, also please flag me, because I know sometimes these slides can be aloof or get funky. Like, I know these aren't a full screen method, so I hope that's okay. Anyone can automate, right? So most of you are already automating today, but an enterprise needs to be able to coordinate and scale. Or as we like to say, we need to orchestrate. Automation is an orchestration function, because likely all of your businesses or all of your silos inside of your company or many pieces inside of your company, whether it be HR, DevOps, IT, are already trying to automate some of their workflow today, right? And whether we're trying to work on onboarding, whether we're trying to automate some of the tickets, orchestrate some of the system stand up, right? If we're trying to close out tickets, all of these are tasks that are trying to be automated or trying to make our lives easier. And sometimes what we do is we get in the way by creating a new automation task that adds more to our hands, right? We now have to enter information to enter this automation task. Now we have to enter this information to do this automation task. And then what happens is we start creating a documentation nightmare, right? Because now we're trying to document the documentation. Well, what we really want to do is orchestrate the workflow. So to be able to orchestrate not just IT to IT, so not just NetOps to SecOps to DevOps to IT Ops, but be able to break down the silos and be able to work with HR to SecOps to IT. We want to be able to orchestrate all of those tools that you are already utilizing today. And that's really where Ansible comes in, is it's built on an open framework, what we call open source, where many of these open tools can connect, work with each other, and we don't have to replace the tool. We're really just an addition to the tool that you are already utilizing today, even if you consider it a competitor, right? And we want to break those silos down and make it as seamless as possible, so you not only have a source of truth, but you have some consistent governance throughout the process. So what's the benefit? Why would I use Ansible? You told me about orchestration. So how does Ansible benefit that? Well, Ansible is built on an open framework where many companies have already started to utilize it today, right? And that's how a lot of our vendors came to be. So if you're using Windows, NetApp, IBM, right? All of them have created their own toolkits that work with Ansible so that it can work pretty seamlessly. And then we go on to that bottom right. If you're looking, this is always kind of where I start, is this agentless approach. So if you're using Windows, that would either be WinRM or WinRMS or even SSH. I know in a lot of the new Windows servers use SSH, and we absolutely can integrate using the SSH inside of Windows. If you're on Linux, it's SSH. And then if you're on network devices, it is going to be on API or using their specific framework like NetCLI. So you don't have to add an agent in already today. What's even more beneficial here is if you don't like the way we're connecting, you can retool it, remodify it to work in your form and fashion that you would prefer. It's simple, so it works across multiple domains. You can see it, you can understand it, and then powerful by being able to handle some of these complex tasks. And some people have even said Ansible has become its own programming language. I don't really believe that or agree with it, but I do understand that the complexity and a lot of the understanding is built around Python. Moving right on through. So we have a lot of certified platforms, probably some of these vendors you're already utilizing today. And when we say certified, we mean certified between both the vendor and the Red Hat Ansible team. There is also open source ones that are completely open, that users have created, that myself have created to help make our lives easier, right? So let's say, for example, I need to create Oracle RAC clusters. Well, that may not be in your certified platforms, but I know there is an Oracle RAC cluster, community collection and role. And if you ever need to create one, or you ever need to get jump started, we have a community ready for you to get an understanding, to get jump started. And we even have open Ansible labs where you can come learn on your own. And even some of the newer things that are coming around generative AI, we even have generative AI workshops where you can learn to code with Ansible on top of AI. So essentially, it'll help generate the Ansible frame and code work for you. So what makes a platform, right? Or what is the Ansible automation platform? Well, first, it's the Ansible automation, right? Inside of there, we have many unique services or languages around cloud certified sources, including certified content. We even have cloud services like telemetry or calculator, which can give us a view into what your company could save. Or we even have a planning calculator where you can build at what it will cost today, tomorrow, 3 year, 4 year, 5 years down the line. And you can even do that with a timing, right? So let's say, money's important, but it's not everything, right? The real number to me has always been hours. And our planning calculator even allows you to utilize hours as a way to see what you're going to save versus just dollars. But both work. But absolutely ever you need to be able to provide it to your personnel or your boss, we have a pretty good calculator for that. And then certified content, right? We talked about it a little bit before, but essentially it's built to give you a jump start and extend your current support or your current offerings or any of the products you may be working with to make sure and ensure they work with the Red Hat platform. Like, especially when you're working with products like IBM Power, we want to make sure that it's verified to work, right? Because how long have you been stuck on a niche with Power where you need to ensure that what you're working on is vetted, true, tried and true. Kind of how the Ansible automation or platform work is creating, operating, and consuming. I will say most of your time in here is normally spent on the consume. However, you are normally not the consumer if you are the creator or the operator. So oftentimes I tend to give these to different roles. When you're in the Ansible platform or you're on that automation journey, we really start at the creation lifecycle, and then we start moving on to the operation lifecycle, and then we go on to the consume, right? I always say this as well, an automation journey often lends its time to the opportunistic approach. And what that really means, or what I'm trying to say here, is we want to spend our time learning the easy stuff first, because that's how we get additional buy-in, right? So it's important to look at that opportunistic approach. Like, how do we do backups? How do I ensure this user's there? How do I ensure CVEs? Or how do I handle reporting? All of that is an opportunistic automation approach from the Ansible standpoint, and very easy to handle, reproduce, and share. And then we start with going on to the systematic approach, where we're able to work with other partners, other portions inside the company, right? Where we're able to get beyond, or we already have manager buy-in to move through that automation lifecycle. And then right back to the slide here, if you're looking, everything inside the Ansible automation platform, so the controller, the hub, the service catalog, and even Insights, which provides that calculator, is included inside the Ansible automation platform or in your purchase of the Ansible automation platform. So moving right through to the create cycle. This is your first look at an Ansible playbook. And I'm going to pause here for a second. So you are able to see it. You're able to modify, change, add, move, configure, right? You're able to see an Ansible playbook here for the first time. And I'm going to walk you through this here in a second. But if you're looking at this, the first thing you can quickly see when you're creating an Ansible playbook is this is a text file, right? That's normally the first thing that stands out. Number two that stands out normally tends to be, I can read it. So as we can quickly see, there's not a lot of markup here as well, right? We don't have a lot of tabs. We don't have a lot of slashes. We don't have a lot of, commas, a lot of quotations. A lot of that isn't needed for Ansible, or we handle that essentially in the back end. What you're seeing here is a complete Ansible playbook for starting and stopping and deploying IIS. And as you can see here, it's done very quickly, right? So let's run through this together. Those 3 dashes on the top indicate the start of a YAML file. Right? And then you see name, host, become, tasks. All of these are what we call the play in Ansible. It really defines what we are getting ready to do. So we're starting to get things configured before we start an action. So we have that name portion there, and that is what is displayed when the play is started. It has no real indication or function apart from the fact that it is displayed when the Ansible playbook is started. Then you have the hosts, and these are the servers or the target devices that Ansible is going to use. So this is Windows-Web. And you'll notice, right, with Windows-Web, that we don't really know where that goes. And that's normally because we're looking at another file to either understand where Windows Web is. And we're going to target or tackle that a little bit later on. So don't feel too concerned about what Windows Web is. Just understand it's a Windows device. There's a become, which is essentially an escalation or a user elevation. And then we have tasks, right? And now this is the action. This is the start. And then you have name, which is what is displayed. This has no function other than this is what is displayed. Right? Then we have Windows service. Now this is an Ansible module, right? Communicating with a Windows service. And we want to ensure that it's running. So the name of the service is W3 service. We want a state of running. Now here's the Red Hat word of the day. It's idempotent. And what that means is Ansible predominantly is idempotent. So we understand that there are other states, whether that be stopped, started, restarted, running, and we need to ensure that whatever that state is, if it's not in running, then we need to get it there. So what happens is we start overlooking a lot of these outliers, like how do I handle this condition or that condition? And now we start moving to an expected condition. And then if that W3 service is already running, we make no changes. So if I was to run this Ansible playbook on 1,000 servers and it made the change once, it would never have to make the change happen again, right? Unless something happened on the server apart from this. But essentially what's that saying is once I run it 100 times, it'll give me the same outcome as if I ran it one time. Now you can start to see some of the value, right? When we start doing infrastructure as code, or when we're verifying the state of a device, we can now create a playbook to ensure that a device is always at a state. And then moving right on down, you'll see the name.
Chris, can I just ask a question? Like, so this playbook here, what would the customers be doing otherwise if they didn't have it?
So they would have to either create manual steps, or they could create, of course, they can always create like a PowerShell script to do so as well. And in fact, Ansible can even run PowerShell scripts.
So the difference is that this would be kind of a centralized place, and you would have logistics on when it was done, and you would know that this is actively making sure that these firewalls are up and running.
Yep. So let's reel that back real quick and go to the host portion. So as you can see here, we can target a group of devices, right? So we can make this change on 1,000, 3,000, 5,000 servers nonetheless, or just one, right? And then if we're to move down to the services, we're ensuring that that state or that service is always running. So when this playbook runs, if it's stopped, started, not present, it'll move it into a running state. Right. So if you didn't use Ansible to do this, right, you may have a few mouse clicks, but you can definitely do this in PowerShell as well. But the big benefit you get here is being able to execute it on many devices and ensuring that it is where it needs to be. And if I'm to sidebar this as well, the big name of the game here is CMS, right? Configuration management. Ansible has been a leader in configuration management for a long time, and that's really what you're seeing an example of. It can do many other things as well, but we see a lot of use cases, especially in the Windows world, for configuration management, making sure the state is where I need it to be, making sure it is what it is, and having some trust and confidence in the product, in the deployment. Did that answer that question?
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. All right, moving down to the bottom one there, we have when service, and then you can see a name of a service and wants to make sure that it's stopped and disabled. Now, there are many other ways to connect and many other ways to start a playbook. This is just a quick example to get your toes a little wet. If anybody has any questions here, feel free to ask away as well. I oftentimes do get questions on the Ansible playbook, so I'll pause once again for that. All right, well, let's keep moving. So what makes up an Ansible playbook? Really? We saw the plays, the modules, and the plugins. Really? We kind of talked about the plays. Modules is really what we talked about, tasks. And then plugins are adding any further extensibility into Ansible that's not already there. So if we need to modify, move, change, insert into Ansible, that's when a plugin would be quite benefit. Let's back up to that slide. So this doesn't actually install IIS in this instance. There definitely is, I think it's called win_feature to install IIS. Sorry, I'm responding to a question by Maxim Boyer. And if the role isn't installed, would it install it? In this playbook, we don't have like a win feature to install the IIS service, but normally, yes. We would have one to either add the feature or add the function, right? And I believe that's even inside one of the exercises today as well on installing IIS. But yeah, absolutely. There's many ways to install it. If it's not there, it'll make sure to configure it or get it up to date. Moving right down to plays. So what are they? A play is a group of tasks that really inform the host on what it's going to execute, the behavior level, and the privilege level, right? So if you look here at the top, we're going to indicate the start of a play with a name. This is what is displayed when you run your playbook, right? That name starts. Then you have the hosts, which are the servers, which you're going to target. And then the become is the privilege level. Then if we're moving on to the tools in the toolkit, also known as the gears in the engine, these are essentially what is being done are the tasks. So anything you see under that task portion is actually what's functioning, what is running. So we're going to say IIS is running, and then we're going to start the service. All of the Ansible modules inside of Windows are handled via PowerShell. For Linux, they're done via Python. They can be done in a multitude of languages, but predominantly most of the ones in Windows are PowerShell. If you are Power, it is Python. And then we'll talk about the extra bits, or essentially the plugins, right? And I always say anything that provides any further expansibility into Ansible is a plugin. So if you're looking here at some variable to nice JSON, that to_nice_JSON is a plugin. The 2_nice_YAML essentially is a plugin. And what that can do is that can grab our output and parse it or change it to anything. Right? And the nice thing about Ansible is every bit of output you receive is a malleable piece of Ansible. So essentially it can be plugged back into the playbook to make judgment calls or make win calls or conditionals. Right. So if I'm trying to say, is this installed, or are we sure this is this box? We can do that with conditionals or malleable data that we get back from Ansible. If we don't like the way this data is formatted, we can even add additional plugins to either format it, encrypt it, decrypt it, add it to an encryption library like CyberArk, HashiCorp Vault, something like that. We can even store some of our facts or variables inside of there. Ansible roles. What are these? Roles are essentially our way of handling tasks that need to be redistributed. So anytime you go to the internet to pull down something for the Ansible at all, it'll normally come in a role function. And why we do that is if it's a common task that allows us to quickly throw either a few playbooks or a single playbook together with some standard variables or standard structure and be able to make that a little bit more malleable or tangible or usable in your environment. Right. So if, for example, if I was to install Docker, Docker would come down as a role. But there may be some situations where a role really doesn't have enough. So as that, we've created something called Ansible collections. And if you're looking down there, you'll notice this includes roles. Well, why collections are utilized is if you are working with a bigger product like Azure or AWS, for example, they have many components inside of their deployment or collection, right? And if you were to grab down a role for AWS, you would need a truckload of roles to work with AWS correctly. So a way to streamline some of those products is we created something called collections. And essentially what they do is they grab everything that they could for those certain product types and combine them into one. All right, so now if you're working with a single piece or a single product, you just have to pull down one collection. Now let's move into the next question that I normally get. And that's I don't need all those pieces. Is this modifiable? Can I store this somewhere else? And absolutely. We created something called an automation hub for you to be able to pull down, modify what you need so that you're only deploying what you feel as a necessary risk in your environment. Right? So if you're DoD or if you're FIPS and you don't want all these extra modules or roles, not a problem. You can modify them, you can configure them. Everything is on a GPL license for you to break, modify, add, or change. It is your world. You can absolutely do whatever you would like with these. But in addition to, you'll see one here called playbooks. And when you work with a lot of the certified content, they may have a jumpstart playbook to get you rock and rolling today. All right. So for example, Cohesity has a collection and their playbook is essentially already done for you to deploy the agents. Right? If you're using Cohesity, the agents are pretty much there for you to install an Ansible playbook. And a lot of products have pretty much jumpstart playbooks in the certified collection field. So once again, I'll pause real quick, see if anybody has any questions or anything that I missed. Feel free to correct me if I miss anything.
That's a question I just saw come up.
Yep. On the client side, do we need an agent to install, manage a Windows server, for example? No. So by default, with Windows, we use WinRMS or WinRM. If you don't like using Windows Remote Management, you can use SSH. Those are kind of the three. There are additional options, but by default, we are agentless almost everywhere. In fact, I've never seen an Ansible agent, but yeah, perfect. Some people don't like using WinRM, but I definitely tell you, even in-house, we do a lot with OpenSSH or SSH to the Windows devices. RSA keys tend to be a more secure means than passwords for us. So let's take a real quick look at what deploying with an Ansible playbook looks like. Now, don't be too frightened here. I feel like when I pull this slide up, I even get the shivers down my back because there's a lot going on here, but don't be too confused. We're going to go through this together. So if you're looking at the right-hand side, this is the Ansible playbook. And you'll see that under task, there's a name, include, role. Now, under that roles portion, on the left-hand side of the screen now, you'll see a role called Nginx. Nginx. And then you'll see a bunch of different folders, defaults, files, tasks, templates. All of these come down by default with a role or collection. And all essentially is in here is a bunch of main YAMLs to be modified or to be installed. And there will, of course, be some READMEs. The READMEs are definitely important here because each var or each collection or each role may have different functions or different functionality. So for example, this Nginx, you'll see a vars of Nginx underscore type equals plus or app protect. All of these are functions of the Nginx that can be modified, changed, or not even used. They may be defaults here. You don't need to utilize anything. But we don't really go beyond that into roles. So if you do have questions, I definitely recommend that you ask away. I can definitely answer any question you have on roles or collections. We do a lot with them later down the road. So Loxley, I can't hear. Oh. Do you have a question? I apologize.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Well, I wasn't sure because I cannot find my. Oh, I just saw the mic. I just saw the mic control, which meant that you were controlling it, I guess.
Correct. They have it at a webinar format, or we have it in a webinar format as of right now. So if you do want to speak up to ask a question, or if you don't want to use the QA or chat, you do have to ask for that permission as of right now.
Okay.
Yep. Did you have a question, sir? I apologize.
Not yet.
Okay, no problem. Oh, I just jumped. Apologize. So let's move on to the automation controller. Some people have also called this the automation control plane. You also hear it kind of called the Ansible tower. All of these are portions of the Ansible controller. Really what this is this is the user interface or the UI, RESTful UI for Ansible. Now understand, anytime you create an Ansible playbook, you're working with VS Code or Atom or IDE, some form of IDE. But when working with the automation controller, that's our way of being able to make that playbook either distributable or work with something like Jenkins or ServiceNow. All of those are portions that you would essentially want the automation controller for, right? Now you have your playbook. So how do I get it into the hands of my engineers or users if I need to utilize it? That's what the automation controller does for you. Sorry, just got a question here from Arnold. Hopefully I said that okay. If I butchered it, I do apologize. Is there an automatic infrastructure discovery or is the list of target servers to be manually created? It's a really good question. So there are Python scripts which can run and discover your infrastructure if you're using the CLI. If you're using the automation control UI, you can use vSphere, Hyper-V, Zen, AWS, Azure, GCP, and we can scan for tags. We can dynamically scan. We can scan every day for a list of systems, hosts, groups. So it really depends on what you're trying to do here, but we do have both options available to you. All right, as we're Red Hat, we try to be pretty agnostic. As we try to be pretty agnostic, we try to be pretty flexible. So if you're trying to scan your infrastructure for servers that end with .149 and have the tag of Terraform Vault, right? We can do that. Or SQL device. We can absolutely do that. But as well, if you prefer to put it in manually, you're more than welcome to do that as well. You can even do a range of IP addresses to reach out to. Moving right over to the automation lifecycle. Right? On the Ansible tower, you really get a few different things here. You get the automation controller, and then what ties into the automation controller is the command line where we have created our Ansible playbooks. Then we have the automation hub, which we can store infrastructure resources like execution environments, right, which are essentially runtimes for the automation controller or even certified content for the controller. Then we have insights for Ansible, which essentially automation controller does telemetry back to Red Hat to report back or provide some of those reporting back features to you. If you don't want the telemetry, no problem. You can disable it very quickly. It's a single checkbox. But we can even scan your Ansible playbooks for CVEs or security. We can even do that inside of your execution environments to ensure that you're keeping them up to date. If you want to do them manually, you can do that as well. There are other tools like Sneak, which can scan your containers for runtimes or scan some of your playbooks or execution environments to ensure that you're keeping things up to compliance. Right. This is what the UI looks like when you run a playbook. It essentially does a task-by-task execution. We start at the top, we go down. Very simple, right? Ansible playbooks are always top to bottom. And as it moves through, each task will go through on its own. A cool fact to learn is you essentially cannot tell the Ansible playbook once it's down on the bottom to go back up. You have to continually to go down. You can use conditionals or when, but an Ansible playbook is always done from top to bottom. So really the anatomy of a playbook in the Ansible or automation controller, as we go through APIs and webhooks, they can be used to kick off run playbooks with variables if needed, workflows where we essentially can tie multiple playbooks together with credentials and then store them either inside of Ansible, or we can even export them out to like Prometheus and Grafana and Elk Stack or Logstash, whatever you have available, we can actually store them. Predominantly, we utilize and store what are called artifacts. An artifact essentially is an XML or a JSON output. Sorry, it's JSON, not XML, forgive me. Output of data, which then can actually either be reused to recreate your Ansible playbook if needed, or rerun as an Ansible playbook if needed. If you're looking here, we can see that we can execute content, get a further details of what's happening. I won't stay here too long. Predominantly, a lot of the automation controller is done via Git, right? We grab the source code via Git. Doesn't have to be just Git. We can use a physical share. We can use a remote HTTPS remote server. But predominantly, I will say most of the time when we start to see companies use and adopt the automation controller portion, Git is the best way to handle it. And the reason for that is an audit trail, but also for handling multiple branches appropriately. Inventories. So this was kind of asked earlier on, are there dynamic inventories? And yes, there sure is, especially in the automation UI, where we have a lot that can be scanned dynamically for you to be assembled into nodes, groups. And we call those smart inventories. So if you ever see that pop up with Ansible, essentially what a smart inventory is an area where we can scan for infrastructure. Username and passwords can be stored inside of the Ansible automation platform. They are AES 256-bit, but I will say you can utilize an alternate like CMDB or HashiCorp Vault, right, to actually store your credentials and pull them in dynamically as needed. We can even use a content management database. I know a lot of companies are continuing to invest in CMDBs to pull inventory, credentials, pathways down, whatever you're storing in them. IPAM, we can even pull that down if needed. Workflows. Workflows are one of my favorite utilities inside of the control plane, because what they are essentially a workflow for approvals, processes, and procedures. So when we talk about that orchestration, what we're really talking about is a workflow. So what you can have somebody do is log into ServiceNow, kick off a ticket for a new user creation. It would then create or start your Ansible workflow. To ensure that the username is done correctly, you could create an approval process to make sure that somebody hits approve before you actually create up the user. Then once you've created the user, you can even create an approval again in certain areas. So for example, if this user needs access to the dev, needs access to prod utilities, right, you could create all of that inside your workflow with multiple approval processes to individual teams, to individual managers, right, to ensure that this user gets created correctly every time. And we see a lot of workflows continually being created, utilized, and modified because it's just a simple logic that provides a lot of testing and a lot of workability from an average workflow, an average user today. Predominantly, most of the things I see in workflows are user creation, server creation, firewall changes. I see a lot of those in workflows because oftentimes those are the ones that require multiple approvals, and we can put approvals in workflows. The next thing on is role-based access control, right? We can have this first connected to an AD system, but then role-based access control is how we can add even more functionality. We can add it for LDAP or two-factor authentication, and even set up for certain users. So when this user logs in, he only has access to this, or when this Active Directory group logs in, he only has access to this. Oftentimes, that is the best way to set things up, right? Only provide access to what they need access to. And you can thin things down as much as possible. Right? So for example, you could have a team, but then have another user that only has access to this template, and then this whole team has access to this other template. You can thin, configure, modify, move, change as needed. API, everything is available inside the UI, is done via the API. The Ansible control plane API is very good. As Red Hat, we have lots and lots of documentation on the API. And if you ever need help, you can always call and ask for some architectural help from the Red Hat team as well. Well, we've hit the first crossroads. Essentially, this would be the drop-off point for any individual who doesn't want to spend a little bit more time getting the hands-on lab portion. So in that time, I'd like to say thank you for the first hour and committing to this Ansible workshop. And you're also able to use this time to go ahead and log into your lab to get configured. These will be up for roughly 48 hours. And this is a great time to really get in there, get configured. I'm sorry, Tamara, do you have something you wanted to add as well? Apologize.
For the next actions, if they had any questions, they can send emails to info@r2i.ca at any time. So they have access to lab for 48 hours, and then we'll get it over to you, Chris. The other thing I did want them to know that Chris does quite a series